Hey everyone! I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. I wake up before the alarm goes off. The hum of the house, the quiet stillness that used to comfort me, now feels hollow. I lie there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling a familiar weight on my chest. It's not something I can name, not yet. It's more like a faint buzzing at the back of my mind, a tension I can't shake. Maybe it's just another Monday. Maybe it's something else. Diane is still asleep beside me, her body curled away, distant. Her breathing is soft, steady, the same as it's always been. But there's something different about it now. I swing my legs out of bed and move quietly to the bathroom, not wanting to wake her. The mirror over the sink catches my reflection, same face, same eyes, but there's something in them now, a shadow of uncertainty. I go through the motions, shave, shower, dress, the usual routine. But even as I do, there's this creeping dissonance I can't shake off. I stand in the kitchen waiting for the coffee to brew and flip through my phone, emails, news, the usual morning distractions. But I'm distracted by something else, something I can't quite put into words. Diane's phone is on the counter, face down as usual. I glance at it, then look away, telling myself there's no reason to be suspicious. I sip the coffee, staring out the window into the backyard. The garden looks peaceful, the trees still, the early sunlight cutting through the branches. I used to love these quiet moments. Now they feel off balance, like a painting that's been hung crooked, but you can't tell exactly what's wrong with it. Diane joins me in the kitchen a few minutes later. She's wearing the robe I bought her for our anniversary last year. It still fits her perfectly, but there's something about the way she moves in it now. More deliberate, more guarded. "Morning," she says, her voice light, almost too light. She kisses me on the cheek, quick, barely there. Her lips are soft, but it's like kissing a stranger. She grabs her phone from the counter and flips it over, glancing at the screen for just a second before slipping it into the pocket of her robe. The whole movement is smooth, practiced, almost like she's done it 100 times before. I try not to read into it. I tell myself it's nothing, that I'm overthinking. It's just work stress, or maybe the routine of our life. People drift, right? But even as I make excuses, there's a tightening in my chest. I know better. I've always known when something is off, even if I can't put my finger on it yet. "Anything special today?" I ask, trying to keep my tone casual. She shrugs, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Not really, just meetings." "You?" "Same," I say. We stand there, side by side, sipping our coffee, staring out into the garden. The silence between us is thick, not the comfortable quiet we used to share. There's a distance between us, a space that used to be filled with conversation, laughter. Now it's just nothing. She leaves for work a little earlier than usual, kissing me on the cheek again, that same perfunctory gesture. I watch her walk out the door, feeling the knot in my chest tighten a little more. I try to tell myself it's all in my head, but the doubt doesn't go away. It lingers, growing like a storm cloud on the horizon. By lunchtime, I'm at my desk, staring blankly at the computer screen, trying to focus on the project in front of me, but my mind keeps drifting back to Diane. I replay the morning in my head, her distant smile, the quick kiss, the way she grabbed her phone so quickly. Something is wrong, but I don't have proof. Just these small, unsettling details that keep piling up, one after the other. I open my email and see a message from her, just a quick note, asking if I'll be home late tonight. It's nothing unusual, but there's something about the way she worded it that makes me pause. The message is short, to the point, lacking the usual warmth. I try to shake the feeling, tell myself I'm reading into things that aren't there. I type back, "Should be home around 7, you?" A few minutes later, her reply comes, "Same. Meeting after work, but I'll be home by 8. I stare at the screen for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. She's been going to a lot of meetings lately. after-hours work functions. I tell myself it's normal. People have busy jobs. But it's the way she says it, the casualness in her tone, like it's nothing, that makes me feel like it's something. I decide to surprise her that evening. I stop at a florist on the way home, pick up a bouquet of roses, the kind she likes. It's not our anniversary or anything special, but I figure maybe it'll break the weird tension between us. Maybe she's stressed, maybe I'm overthinking, maybe this will fix it. When I walk into the house, she's in the kitchen making dinner. She turns when she hears the door open, her face lighting up in surprise when she sees the flowers. But the smile doesn't reach her eyes. It's just a flicker, a reflex. "These are beautiful," she says, taking them from me, brushing her fingers lightly over the petals. "Thank you." I lean in to kiss her, but there's something stiff about the way she leans into me. It's brief, awkward, like we're playing parts in a scene, actors going through the motions. I try to ignore it, try to push the thought away, but the knot in my chest tightens even more. We sit down for dinner, making small talk about our day, her meetings, my work. The conversation feels forced, stilted. She talks about a new colleague at work, someone named Eric. She mentions him casually, in passing, but I notice the way her voice changes just slightly when she says his name. There's a flicker of something there, something I can't quite place. I push my plate away, appetite gone. I try to engage, but my mind is elsewhere. Eric. The name sticks in my head, echoing long after the conversation has moved on. After dinner, Diane excuses herself to take a shower. I sit on the couch, the TV flickering in the background, but I'm not really watching. My mind is spinning, replaying every conversation, every glance, every awkward kiss. Something is wrong. I can feel it now, deep in my gut, but I have no proof. Just a growing unease, a sense that the ground is shifting beneath me. Her phone buzzes on the counter, the screen lighting up for a brief second before going dark again. I glance at it, my heart pounding in my chest. It's nothing, just a notification. But the way she always keeps it face down, always close to her, gnaws at me. When she comes back into the room, towel drying her hair, I make a decision. I grab my jacket and stand. "I'm going for a quick walk," I say, trying to sound casual. Diane looks up, a little surprised, but she nods. "Okay. Don't be too long." I leave the house, the cool night air hitting my face as I step outside. My feet hit the pavement, my mind racing. I walk around the block, aimless, trying to clear my head, trying to convince myself it's nothing, that I'm just paranoid. That marriages go through rough patches, that people drift and reconnect all the time. But even as I tell myself this, I can't shake the feeling that something is slipping through my fingers, something I can't stop. And it's not just my imagination. The signs are there, subtle, but there. I think of her smiles that don't reach her eyes, the kisses that feel like obligations, the late nights, the meetings, the name Eric, echoing in my mind like a warning bell. When I get back to the house, Diane is already in bed. I stand in the doorway for a moment, watching her sleep. Her face is peaceful, serene, but there's a distance between us now, a chasm I don't know how to cross. I crawl into bed beside her, careful not to wake her, and stare at the ceiling. My mind won't stop spinning, the doubt settling in deeper, like a hook lodged in my chest. The next morning, it's the same routine. Coffee, work, another day that feels like it's on repeat. But underneath it all, the tension between us is growing. Each passing day, each conversation, each quick kiss feels like one more brick in the wall that's been slowly rising between us. I try to shake the feeling, try to tell myself it's all in my head, but it's not. Something is wrong. I know it now. I just can't prove it yet. But I will. I can feel it coming, like a storm gathering on the horizon, dark clouds rolling in, the air thick with anticipation. And I know deep down that when it hits, everything is going to change. The days that follow are filled with a thick, suffocating silence. Diane and I move around each other like strangers, living under the same roof but inhabiting entirely different worlds. Each moment I spend with her feels like walking on glass, careful, measured, always aware of the tension hanging between us. Every interaction feels scripted, devoid of warmth or authenticity. My suspicions are gnawing at me, growing by the day. It's the little things, the small, almost imperceptible changes in her behavior that light a fire of doubt inside me. She's on her phone more often, but the screen is always turned away, hidden. She's been leaving the room to take calls, her voice lowered to a whisper as if whatever she's saying needs to be kept from me. When we sit together on the couch, there's a gulf between us, a chasm filled with all the words we're not saying, all the questions I'm too afraid to ask. I start watching her more closely. I can't help it. It's instinctual now, the way I study her every move, analyze every expression. Each time she glances down at her phone with that quick, furtive look, my stomach tightens. Her smile, when it does come, feels forced, like an obligation she's trying to fulfill rather than a genuine expression. And there's something else. The way she started dressing, more carefully, more deliberately. Clothes she used to save for special occasions now appear in her everyday wardrobe. New perfume, subtle but noticeable, lingers in the air as she walks by. I tell myself I'm imagining it, that I'm looking for signs where there are none. But I don't believe my own lies anymore. One night she comes home later than usual. She doesn't offer an explanation this time, just a vague excuse about work running late. I'm sitting on the couch, pretending to watch TV, but I'm really just waiting for her, waiting for something to give me more reason to doubt, to confirm the sinking feeling that's been consuming me. As she slips off her coat and heads straight to the shower, something inside me shifts. I can't ignore it anymore. While she's in the shower, I glance at her phone on the kitchen counter. It's just sitting there, the black screen blank and cold. My heart hammers in my chest as I pick it up, telling myself I'm only checking the time, that I'm not really snooping. But my hands betray me, fingers moving to unlock the screen. Only the passcode's changed. A rush of nausea rolls through me, cold and sharp, like a blade twisting in my gut. Diane has never changed her passcode before. Not once in the years we've been married. My first instinct is to march into the bathroom and demand answers, to confront her right then and there. But I stop myself. If I do that, if I blow up now without proof, she'll find a way to explain it away. She'll make me feel like I'm being paranoid, like I'm seeing things that aren't there. So I put the phone down and wait. The seed has been planted and it's already growing, taking root in the dark corners of my mind. I have to be careful now. I can't let her know I'm onto her. Not yet. A week later, the confirmation I didn't want finally arrives. It's late, past midnight. Diane had gone to bed hours ago, claiming she was exhausted after another long day at work. I was in the kitchen, nursing a drink, trying to drown out the noise in my head, when her phone buzzed on the counter. I don't know what made me do it, but something pulled me toward it. Like a magnet, my hand was drawn to the screen, and before I could think, I was holding it in my palm. The screen lit up with a message preview. The name on the screen made my chest tighten. Eric. Missing you. Can't wait till tomorrow. It's not a long message. There's nothing overtly damning about it, but it's enough. It's everything. My body feels cold, numb, like I've been plunged into freezing water. The words replay in my mind over and over, each time twisting the knife deeper. Missing you. Can't wait till tomorrow. Eric, her coworker. I remember him now, vaguely from a Christmas party a few years back. Tall, handsome, charismatic. The kind of guy who always seems to be in the middle of every conversation, always smiling, always charming. The kind of guy who could make anyone feel special. I hadn't thought much of him at the time. Why would I have? Diane had mentioned him in passing, talking about some work projects, but I hadn't paid attention. I hadn't seen him as a threat. But now, his name is like a curse, a wound that won't stop bleeding. I sit down heavily at the kitchen table, my head spinning. My first impulse is to wake her up, to confront her with the evidence right then. But the rational part of me, cold, calculating, takes over. No, I need more. I need something undeniable, something she can't talk her way out of. This message is bad, but it's not enough. Not yet. The next morning, I wait for the perfect opportunity. Diane heads into the bathroom to take a shower, leaving her phone unattended on the nightstand. I sit on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling slightly as I pick it up again. I know the new passcode now, after catching a glimpse of her typing it in days ago. I feel sick, like a man about to jump off a cliff, but there's no stopping this now. The screen unlocks. My breath catches in my throat. The messages are all there, every single one. Months of conversation between Diane and Eric, neatly cataloged in front of me. I scroll through them, my hands cold and shaking, my stomach churning. It's not just one message, it's hundreds. Texts that span months, going back farther than I'd ever imagined. They're not obscene, they're worse. The texts are intimate, filled with inside jokes, casual affection, things shared between people who are far closer than colleagues. I read the details of their meetups, their lunches, their drinks after work, and then the hotel rooms. Quiet weekends spent together while I was away on business trips, unsuspecting, living in my comfortable ignorance. They've been careful, but not careful enough. My eyes burn as I read on. Eric's been telling her he's unhappy in his marriage. Diane, in her replies, tries to be pragmatic, rational, but I can see it in her words. She's hooked. She's falling for him. Or maybe she's already fallen. I can practically smell the deceit seeping from every word, every message. And it's not just physical, I realize. It's emotional, too. That's what cuts the deepest. She hasn't just been sleeping with him. She's been confiding in him, sharing pieces of herself that used to be mine. Secrets, fears, dreams. They've been building something together while I've been sitting here, blind, trusting, foolish. I feel my hands shaking, but it's not sadness that grips me. It's rage, an icy, controlled fury that rises from somewhere deep inside, freezing out any other emotion. My pulse slows, my thoughts sharpen. I've been played for a fool, and I will not let this stand. Diane comes out of the shower, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I hear the door click open as she moves back into the bedroom, humming softly under her breath. I place the phone back on the nightstand and stand, my face a mask of calm. She glances at me, smiling absently, and asks something about dinner plans, but I barely register the words. I can't look at her the same anymore. The betrayal is right there, staring me in the face, and yet she's standing in front of me, pretending everything's normal, that she's still the wife I thought I knew. I watch her for a moment, absorbing the reality of who she is now, the woman who's been lying to me for months, who's been giving herself to another man, all while coming home to me every night. I'm no longer the man who had vague suspicions. I'm no longer guessing, no longer doubting. Now I know. I've seen the truth in black and white, and there's no turning back. My reality has been shattered, and nothing will ever be the same. I say nothing. I just nod, like a man going through the motions, a man still clinging to the final threads of normalcy before the whole thing unravels. But inside, the plan is already forming. I will make her pay. I will make him pay. I leave the room, my chest tight with a controlled, simmering fury. She has no idea what's coming next. The shock of Diane's betrayal had been replaced by something far more dangerous: focus. My rage wasn't wild or reckless. It was cold, controlled, and calculated. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontation was impulsive, and impulse was the weapon of fools. No, I would take my time. Let her believe everything was fine. Let her think she was getting away with it. Diane wouldn't even know I'd caught on until it was too late, until she was on her knees with nowhere left to crawl. Every morning, I would go through the motions, kiss her goodbye, smile when necessary, and pretend I was still the same man she'd been deceiving for months. Inside, I was building something, piece by piece. A plan that would not only make her feel the depth of her betrayal, but destroy the fragile little world she'd constructed around her affair. I couldn't let her know I knew, not yet. Instead, I made her think I was slipping away in my own way. I started spending more time at work, staying late for meetings that didn't exist. Sometimes I'd come home after midnight pretending to be exhausted, barely speaking to her before crashing into bed. She noticed. I could see it in the way she watched me. Her eyes narrowed, wondering if I was losing interest, or worse, if I'd found someone else. Diane's guilt began to bubble to the surface, and it was almost laughable to see her attempt to draw closer to me, as if she could feel me slipping through her fingers. Every step of this was deliberate, every calculated silence, every nonchalant excuse for why I couldn't have dinner with her. I made her wonder, let her imagination play tricks on her. And through it all, I kept my anger locked tight. No outbursts, no accusations. I needed her comfortable, at ease. I needed her to let her guard down so I could strike when the time was right. But that moment of control, the moment when I was the master of every move, every thought, was disrupted by a complication I didn't see coming. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was sitting in my office pretending to work while I mentally drafted the next stage of my plan. I was going to start with Eric, of course. He was the poison that had seeped into my life, and I intended to cut him out before I turned to Diane. But then, as I was scrolling through meaningless emails, my assistant, Natalie, buzzed through the intercom. There's a woman here. She's asking to speak with Eric Porter, Natalie said, her voice uneasy. My heart stopped. I sat up straighter, pulse quickening. Who? I don't know. She's intense. She's at the front desk now, yelling at the receptionist, demanding to see him. I stood up from my desk so fast that my chair tipped over. I'll be right there, I said, my voice controlled despite the sudden surge of adrenaline coursing through me. When I reached the lobby, I saw her immediately. A woman with wild eyes, her face flushed with anger, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She was standing at the front desk, her voice raised, loud enough that heads were turning in the office. It had to be her, Eric's wife. I stepped in before she could escalate any further, moving between her and the terrified receptionist. Ma'am, I said calmly, how can I help you? She turned toward me, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. I'm looking for Eric Porter, she said, her voice sharp, clipped. Where is he? I'm sorry, but Eric isn't in the office right now. I lied smoothly. Maybe I can help you instead. Her eyes blazed with fury, and for a moment I thought she might explode right then and there. But I kept my voice calm, steady, exuding the kind of authority that would diffuse the situation. Slowly, I could see her anger shift, her breathing steadying, and she let out a long, shaky breath. Who are you? She asked, her voice quieter now. I'm a colleague of Eric's, I said. Why don't we step outside and talk? She hesitated but nodded reluctantly. I led her out of the building, far enough away that the prying eyes of my coworkers wouldn't witness the unfolding disaster. When we were alone, I turned to her. What's this about? Her lips pressed into a thin line before the floodgates opened. He's cheating on me, she spat out, venom in her words. I know it. I found his messages. My stomach tightened. She was further ahead in the game than I'd realized. I'd planned on using Eric's wife to accelerate his downfall, but I hadn't expected her to be this close to the truth. I see, I said carefully. Do you have proof? Not solid, not yet, she admitted, pacing in agitation. But I know it's happening. I saw enough of his texts, messages that weren't for me. I just need more. My mind raced. This changed things. Eric's wife was a wild card I hadn't accounted for, but now that she was in play, I could use her. But I had to be cautious, measured. You're certain? I asked. Certain, she snapped, her voice cracking. I just don't know who the woman is yet, but I will. And when I do, I'll destroy them both. I nodded slowly, calculating my next move. Eric's wife was already a weapon I could use. I just needed to point her in the right direction and let her do the damage. I think you should take some time to think this through, I said, feigning concern. Acting too soon might make things worse for you. Eric's clever, and if he senses you're onto him, he'll cover his tracks better. Her eyes narrowed at me, considering my words. Why are you helping me? I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. I don't like cheaters, I said simply. They deserve what's coming to them. She studied me for a moment, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. Finally, she nodded. Fine, but I'm not giving him much time. If I don't find out who she is soon, you'll get your proof, I said, but be patient. It'll be worth it. She walked away without another word, leaving me standing in the alley behind the office, my mind racing. Eric's wife was a ticking time bomb, ready to go off. I had to adjust my plans. I needed to move faster now, before she exploded in public and took away my control over the situation. I couldn't afford any missteps. Not now. That night, Diane seemed oblivious to the storm that was brewing around her. We sat at dinner, her phone resting on the table, as always. I couldn't help but glance at it, wondering if Eric had texted her during the day, wondering if she'd been thinking of him while she sat across from me. I was thinking, Diane said, breaking the silence, maybe we could go away for a weekend soon, just the two of us. It's been a while. Her suggestion was so absurd, so tone-deaf to the reality she was hiding, that I almost laughed. Instead, I nodded, masking my contempt. Sure, I said, forcing a smile. That sounds nice. She smiled, the tension between us easing for just a second, and it struck me how easily she could still lie to my face. How effortless it was for her to pretend everything was fine. I couldn't let her keep this up. Not much longer. After dinner, I retreated to my office, my mind already racing with adjustments to my plan. Eric's wife was a problem, but also a tool I could sharpen and aim at Diane and Eric. If I played this right, I wouldn't even have to make the first move. She would tear into them with the fury of a woman betrayed, and I'd be standing just far enough away to watch it all come crashing down. I spent the next few days refining my steps, ensuring every angle was covered. I needed to be sure Diane would be crushed, not just emotionally, but in every aspect of her life. She'd lose her lover, her reputation, and the stability of the comfortable life she'd built on the foundation of lies. But first, I needed to make sure Eric's wife found out exactly who her husband's mistress was. That was the trigger for everything. Once she knew, once she had her proof, there would be no stopping the chain of events I was about to set in motion. It wasn't long before my plans started to take shape. Eric's wife hadn't been idle. She was watching him more closely now, her suspicions confirmed by every little slip-up he made. And I was there, just out of sight, guiding her in the right direction. One evening, after work, I followed Eric to a small, discreet hotel, the same one he and Diane had been using for their weekend rendezvous. I wasn't the only one watching. Eric's wife was parked in a car across the street, her eyes fixed on the entrance, waiting for him to slip up. When Diane joined him a few minutes later, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything exploded, and I couldn't wait to see it burn. I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks, and now it was finally here. I could feel the weight of it, the tension in the air as Diane sat across from me at the restaurant. Her eyes flickered with unease, her fingers fidgeting with the edges of her napkin. I had told her earlier that we needed to talk, but I left it at that, letting her mind spin with possibilities. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't know how deep her betrayal had cut, how much I'd uncovered. That made it even sweeter, watching her squirm, her discomfort growing in the silence between us. I waited, deliberately drawing out the moment. I wanted her anxiety to build, to settle in her bones. Every passing second was a noose tightening around her throat, and she didn't even know it yet. The waiter came by, refilling our water glasses, breaking the quiet. Diane glanced at him gratefully, as if the brief interruption could somehow relieve the tension. But when he left, her eyes darted back to mine, searching for some kind of answer in my expression. "You've been distant lately," she said finally, her voice uncertain, fragile. "Is something wrong?" I leaned back in my chair, watching her. "I don't know, Diane. You tell me." Her brow furrowed, confusion flickering across her face. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said slowly, my voice low, measured, "is there something you want to tell me?" She froze, her eyes widening just a fraction before she quickly masked it with a nervous laugh. "What? No, of course not. Why would you—" "Stop lying," I cut her off, my voice sharp. The mask she'd been wearing for so long, the one of the dutiful wife, the loving partner, slipped just a bit. Panic flashed in her eyes, and I leaned forward, locking her in my gaze. "Eric," I said, letting his name hang in the air between us like a noxious gas. Diane's face drained of color. "I know about him. I know everything." For a moment, she was too stunned to react. Her mouth opened slightly, as if to say something, but no words came. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how much I knew, how much she could still hide, but there was no hiding anymore. I'd dragged her secret out into the light, and now I was watching it burn her alive. "You don't," she started, but her voice faltered. Oh, I do. I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolling through the hundreds of messages I'd saved between her and Eric. I set the phone down on the table, the screen illuminating their words. Here's the proof. You want to explain the hotel reservations? The weekend getaways while I was at work? Her hand flew to her mouth as she stared at the phone, her eyes wide with disbelief. She hadn't expected me to know. She hadn't thought I was capable of finding out. That was her first mistake. I I can explain, she stammered, her voice shaking. It's not what you think. Don't, I said, my voice ice cold. Don't insult me with more lies, Diane. I've seen enough. I know enough. Her eyes welled with tears, and she reached out across the table, her hand trembling as she tried to grasp mine. I pulled back, not letting her touch me. Her tears meant nothing. Not now. Maybe once they would have gutted me. Maybe once I would have believed she was sorry. But now? They were just another manipulation, another act in the performance she'd been putting on for months. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. Hurt me? I laughed, but it was a hollow sound. You've been lying to me for months. You've been sleeping with him behind my back, building a life with him while you came home and smiled in my face. Don't pretend this was some accident, Diane. You chose this. You chose him. She shook her head desperately, tears streaming down her cheeks. No, it wasn't like that. It just happened. I love you, I do, but things got complicated, I finished for her, my voice dripping with venom. Is that what you're going to say, that things got complicated? Don't give me that bullshit. Her lips quivered, but she had nothing left to say. There was no defense, no excuse. She had been caught, and now she had to face the consequences. But before I could say anything else, a commotion erupted at the entrance of the restaurant. I glanced over just in time to see her, Eric's wife. She stormed in, her face a mask of fury, her eyes wild with rage. The room seemed to freeze as heads turned to watch the spectacle unfolding. Eric was seated at the back, and she spotted him instantly. Without a second of hesitation, she marched up to his table, her footsteps echoing in the sudden shocked silence of the restaurant. I could see Eric's face pale as he looked up at her, his mouth opening in surprise. Before he could say a word, she slapped him, hard. The sound of the impact reverberated through the room, and gasps filled the air as Eric recoiled, his hand flying to his reddened cheek. You son of a bitch, she hissed, her voice shaking with anger. How long have you been screwing her behind my back? Eric stammered something, his words incoherent, but she wasn't listening. She wasn't here for explanations. She was here for blood. Her eyes shifted, and for the first time, she noticed Diane. Her face contorted with rage, and in an instant she turned on her, her finger pointing accusingly. You, she spat, you home-wrecking whore. Diane flinched, shrinking back into her seat, her eyes wide with terror. She tried to say something, tried to defend herself, but Eric's wife wasn't having it. She leaned over the table, her voice a vicious snarl. How could you? She demanded, her voice cracking with emotion. You pretended to be my friend. You smiled in my face while you were screwing my husband. Diane sat frozen, unable to respond. The entire restaurant watched, stunned into silence. No one moved. No one tried to stop it. They were all just as captivated as I was, watching the perfect storm unfold. Eric's wife straightened, her chest heaving with rage, and without another word, she turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving chaos in her wake. Eric sat there, still clutching his cheek, his eyes wide with shock. And Diane, she just sat there, trembling, her face ashen, her lips moving but no sound coming out. I watched her for a long moment, the satisfaction settling deep in my chest. This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. She was broken, exposed. There was nowhere left for her to hide. I leaned back in my chair, taking in the full scope of her devastation. Her eyes slowly turned toward me, wide and pleading, searching for some kind of forgiveness. But all I felt was cold, empty. It's your turn now, Diane, I said, my voice low but steady. She blinked, confused, her mind clearly still reeling from what had just happened. What do you mean? I stood up, leaving the phone on the table, letting her see the messages again, the proof of her betrayal staring back at her. "It's over," I said simply. "I'm done with you. I'm done with all of this." Her face crumpled, and she reached out for me, desperation in her eyes. "Please don't." I turned my back on her, walking out of the restaurant without a second glance. Behind me, I could hear her sobs, could feel the weight of her collapse, but it didn't touch me. I was beyond that now. Outside, the cold night air hit me like a wave, sharp and bracing. I breathed in deeply, letting the chill settle in my bones. I had done what I needed to do. I had torn down the lies, exposed her for what she was, and now it was time to move on. The restaurant door swung shut behind me, muffling Diane's cries as I walked away. Over the next few days, I played the part perfectly, giving Diane just enough hope to think that maybe, just maybe, she could fix this. I didn't throw her out or scream at her. I didn't leave her. I let her think we could still talk, still work through the mess she'd created. I listened to her pathetic apologies, nodding at the right moments, pretending I hadn't already decided how it would all end. Each night, I'd sit at the kitchen table and she'd join me, face still blotchy from the tears she'd cried throughout the day. She'd try to explain herself, her voice raw, desperate. I'd look at her, pretending to listen, but I didn't hear a word she said. The truth had already sunk its teeth in, leaving no room for her excuses. It was like listening to someone drown, knowing full well you wouldn't throw them a rope. "I never wanted to hurt you," she'd say again and again, as if repetition could make it true. She looked exhausted, crumbling under the weight of what she'd done. But I didn't care about her suffering anymore. I cared about the plan. I had already met with my lawyer. Everything was moving fast, much faster than she could have ever anticipated. Our joint accounts were frozen, the house title transferred into my name alone. It was all happening quietly, behind the scenes, and she was none the wiser. I wanted her to think she still had a chance to repair this, to fix us. I wanted her to cling to that hope until I tore it out of her hands. One morning, while she was still asleep, I reached out to Eric's boss. A quick, anonymous tip, carefully worded and vague enough not to trace back to me, was all it took. I knew the details of his affair would do the rest. Corporate environments like his were sensitive to scandal, and Eric was already teetering on the edge. His boss would want to protect the company's reputation. They always did. Within 2 days, I heard the news. Eric had been quietly let go. Diane had no idea, of course. She still thought he was the successful, ambitious man she'd been seduced by, but I knew his career was over, at least for now. A call from a friend at a competing firm confirmed it. Eric's chances of landing anything soon were slim. Word was spreading, discreetly, but enough to ensure doors wouldn't open for him anytime soon. I didn't need to confront him. His life was unraveling on its own. At home, I continued the charade. Diane was trying harder than I'd ever seen. She cooked meals, cleaned the house, and begged me to sit down and talk about us, about how we could rebuild. It was almost pathetic. Every attempt she made to bridge the distance between us only widened it further. "Please, just talk to me," she begged one evening, tears in her eyes as she placed a perfectly cooked dinner on the table. "We can get through this. I know we can." I looked at her across the table, my expression neutral. "Do you really think things can ever be the same?" My voice was calm, almost too calm, and I watched her flinch. She opened her mouth to answer, but the doorbell rang, interrupting her. The timing couldn't have been better. Diane wiped her eyes quickly, trying to compose herself. "I'll get it," she muttered, turning toward the door. I stayed seated, watching her as she moved across the room. She opened the door, and I heard her sharp intake of breath. It was the process server. From where I sat, I could see the confusion on her face as he handed her the envelope, the legal documents heavy in her hands. She stood there for a moment, stunned, before turning back toward me. I could see the fear dawning in her eyes as she fumbled to open the envelope, her hands trembling. She pulled out the divorce papers, and her face went pale. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I stood up from the table, walking toward her slowly. "It's what you deserve," I said quietly. Her eyes darted to mine, wide with disbelief, as if she still couldn't process what was happening. "No, no, please," she stammered, shaking her head. We can fix this. I can make it right. Please don't. It's done, I said, cutting her off, my voice firm. I've already moved our accounts. You have nothing left, Diane. The house? It's in my name now. You'll get what's fair, but don't expect more than that. The look of disbelief on her face was more satisfying than I'd anticipated. She was crumbling, unraveling right in front of me, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. You can't do this, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I already have, I said, stepping closer, lowering my voice. You didn't think there would be consequences for what you did? You didn't think I'd find out? That I'd just sit here while you destroyed everything we had? She shook her head, sobbing now, her body trembling. I'm sorry, she cried. I'm so sorry. I don't care, I said coldly. It's too late for sorry. I turned away from her, my mind already moving to the next steps. There was nothing left to say. The papers were signed, the legal wheels already in motion. She was about to lose everything, her stability, her comfort, the life she'd so carefully curated, while she betrayed me. Over the next few days, Diane became a ghost. She wandered the house, lost, her face etched with desperation. She barely spoke, and when she did, it was to beg for a second chance. But her words fell on deaf ears. I didn't engage anymore. I didn't need to. One afternoon, as I sat at the kitchen table going through financial documents, Diane stood in the doorway, her eyes hollow and red from crying. I don't have anywhere to go, she said softly, her voice cracking. What am I supposed to do? I didn't look up. Figure it out, I said flatly. She lingered there for a moment, as if waiting for some sign of mercy, some flicker of hope that I'd take her back. But I didn't. I didn't even look at her. A few days later, she left. I didn't see her go. She didn't say goodbye. The house was quieter without her, emptier. But that emptiness felt right. I'd taken everything from her, just like she had taken everything from me. She was gone, and I was finally free. The fallout from the affair spread further than Diane ever could have imagined. Eric's wife had filed for divorce, and the gossip about him being fired had made its way through the industry. His reputation was ruined, and no one would touch him professionally. Diane had lost the one thing she thought she could fall back on. There was no future for her and Eric, no escape plan to pick up where they'd left off. In the end, they both had nothing. I should have felt victorious, but instead there was a hollowness inside me that I hadn't anticipated. I had won, hadn't I? I had dismantled her life, destroyed the man who had helped her betray me. I had taken control of everything, and yet there was no satisfaction, just a quiet, lingering emptiness where love and trust had once been. I spent the next few weeks cleaning up the remnants of our life together. I went through the house, packing up her things, clearing away the memories. There was no final confrontation, no dramatic closure, just a slow, methodical erasing of the life we'd built. As I packed the last box of her belongings, I stood in the middle of the living room, taking it all in. The space felt foreign now, devoid of warmth or meaning. It was just a house, stripped of the life we'd once shared in it. I loaded the box into the car, ready to drop it off at whatever temporary place Diane had landed. I didn't need to know where she was. I didn't care. As far as I was concerned, she no longer existed. On the drive back, I thought about the man I had been before all of this. The man who had trusted, who had believed in the life he was living. He was gone now, buried under the weight of betrayal and revenge. I had become something else, someone colder, harder. I wasn't sure if I liked it, but it didn't matter anymore. As I pulled into the driveway, I looked at the house one last time. There was no going back. The life I'd known was over, and all that remained was the shell of what once was. I turned the engine off, staring at the front door, knowing this was the last chapter. The revenge was complete. Diane was ruined. Eric's life was in shambles. I had won, but it hadn't brought the peace I thought it would. Just a quiet, gnawing emptiness. I got out of the car, locking the door behind me, and walked inside, leaving the past behind. The dust had settled. Diane was gone, her presence erased from the house we once shared. The silence that remained was heavy, almost suffocating, but it was a silence I had chosen. I had orchestrated this outcome piece by piece, dismantling our marriage, her life, and everything she thought she could cling to. But now, as I stood in the living room with nothing but the echo of my own thoughts, I wasn't sure how to feel. I should have been relieved, vindicated. I had taken back control, destroyed the lies, and ensured Diane would never forget what she had done. I had broken her down, made her feel the pain she'd inflicted on me, multiplied 100-fold. I had thought revenge would taste sweet. I had thought it would be satisfying to watch her crumble. But as I stared at the empty space where her things used to be, the hollowness inside me deepened. I had won, hadn't I? I walked through the house room by room, taking in the aftermath of my carefully constructed plan. The bedroom felt cold without her clothes in the closet. The kitchen was too quiet without the sound of her clattering dishes, trying too hard to win me back in those final weeks. Every space was emptier than I'd anticipated, stripped not just of her, but of something intangible, something that had once made this place feel like home. The truth was, it hadn't been home for a long time. Not really. Not since the lies had started. Not since the trust had been shattered. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same spot where Diane had begged for another chance. Her voice still echoed in my mind, the desperation in her eyes when she realized how much she'd lost. She had tried so hard to convince me that things could be fixed, that we could somehow rebuild what she'd destroyed. But I had known better. I had known there was no going back. And now, sitting there alone, I wondered if there was any moving forward either. I had destroyed her, just as I'd planned. Eric's life was in ruins, his career in shambles. Diane's reputation was tarnished, her future uncertain. They had nothing left. And yet, in the silence of this empty house, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a dull, throbbing ache where my love for her had once been. I had won, but at what cost? The thought gnawed at me, refusing to let go. I had spent months consumed by rage, driven by a need for justice, for revenge. And I had gotten it, hadn't I? I had orchestrated the perfect downfall, made sure Diane and Eric would never recover from the mess they'd made. But now that it was over, I was left with nothing but the wreckage of my own emotions. The anger was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't sadness, not exactly. It wasn't regret either. It was just emptiness. A quiet, gnawing void where all that rage and fury had once burned so brightly. I stood up from the table, walking toward the front door. The air in the house felt too thick, too stifling. I needed to get out, to breathe. I grabbed my jacket, stepping outside into the cool night air. The street was quiet, the neighborhood still. It was the same neighborhood Diane and I had chosen together back when we still believed in the life we were building, back when I thought she was someone I could trust. I started walking, letting the cold air bite at my skin, trying to clear my head. But the further I walked, the heavier the weight in my chest became. I had been so focused on revenge, so determined to make her pay, that I hadn't stopped to consider what would come after. What would be left of me once the dust settled? The truth was, I wasn't the same man I had been before all of this. I wasn't the man who had believed in loyalty, in love. That man was gone, buried under layers of betrayal and bitterness. And I wasn't sure who I was now, or if I even liked the person I'd become. I had taken control of my fate, just as I'd planned. I had made sure Diane couldn't hurt me again. But in the process, I had lost something more fundamental, my ability to trust, to love. To feel anything other than the cold satisfaction of having gotten my revenge. I kept walking, my feet carrying me down streets that were both familiar and foreign at the same time. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The world had shifted, tilted on its axis, and I was left standing in the middle of it, unsure of my next step. I had thought revenge would bring closure, that it would somehow make everything right again. But all it had done was deepen the divide between who I used to be and who I had become. It had given me control, yes, but at the cost of something far more important, my ability to move on. I reached the edge of the park, the one Diane and I used to walk through on lazy Sunday afternoons. I hadn't been here in months, not since everything had started to unravel. I stood at the entrance, staring at the path we used to take. the one that wound through the trees and along the small pond at the center. The memories hit me all at once, her laughter, her smile, the way she used to reach for my hand without thinking, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I closed my eyes, trying to shake off the weight of it, but it clung to me, thick and suffocating. I had thought I could erase her, that I could wipe away the memories, the pain, with one decisive act of vengeance. But Diane wasn't just a person I could remove from my life. She was woven into every memory, every moment of the life we had built together, and no amount of revenge could change that. I turned away from the park, heading back toward the house. The walk felt longer this time, heavier. By the time I reached the driveway, my mind was a blur of thoughts I couldn't quite untangle. I unlocked the front door, stepping inside the quiet, empty house. I had won. I had taken back control. But it hadn't brought me the peace I thought it would. I moved through the house slowly, turning off the lights, room by room. The silence pressed in on me as I made my way upstairs, the weight of the past few months settling heavily on my shoulders. I reached the bedroom, pausing at the door. The bed was made, the room spotless, but it felt wrong, sterile. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty space where Diane's things used to be. She was gone, erased from my life, but the ghosts of our marriage still lingered. I walked over to the window, looking out into the darkness. The street was quiet, the world moving on without me. I could feel the finality of it now, the weight of everything I had lost, not just Diane, but the version of myself who had once believed in something more than revenge. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a loss. A quiet, aching loss that settled deep in my chest and refused to leave. In the end, revenge hadn't brought me closure. It had only left me standing alone in the aftermath, unsure of who I was or where I was supposed to go next. I turned away from the window, pulling the curtains closed. There was no going back now. Diane was gone, and the life we had built was nothing more than a memory. I had survived, but survival came at a cost. As I lay down in the empty bed, the silence of the house pressed in on me. There was no one left to hurt me, no one left to betray me. I had taken control of my fate, but it hadn't brought me the peace I thought it would. It had only left me here, alone, in the darkness, with nothing but the weight of my own decisions to keep me company. And maybe that was the real cost of revenge.